That's the third time you've said I'm new. I'm rejuvenating by the minute. This is wonderful. I have to change jobs more often. Well, first of all, I knew following Matthew and Katrina was going to be a bit difficult. They're not exactly a warm-up act. They're more sort of scene stealers, and I wasn't disappointed. I expected to compliment them as well on their achievements, which are very substantial. I've followed them indirectly. This is the latest blossoming, but we've seen a lot coming out from Leeds, and I would like to pay tribute to that, at all levels, incidentally, including Yamlapt as well. However, what I did not expect to do was to compliment Matthew on his courage. I have never heard an English speaker defending consistency of pronunciation. Rough, cough, through, though, bow, enough? I see no consistency, nor any need, incidentally. Fine. Okay, let's move on to, I'm afraid, rather drier things, but I know that this is something which a lot of people are interested in, and which we inside tend to take for granted, but it's not a bad idea to tell you about how we have seen the latest trends. And I have a good candidate for the acronym, terrible acronym of the year, ISLOT. For years, I have waged a war in favor of the old-fashioned Ancien Franc interpreter day. But this year, I have to admit defeat. I've made my own statistics in interpreter days for the past 4 years. But this year, I'm afraid I have to bow to ISLOT, which still sounds to me rather medical or anatomical, or perhaps the latest Apple product, rather than something that describes our work, but there we are. If you take the new ISLOT and divide it by 2, the number of divide it by 2, you will get more or less the old interpreter day. For those of you who are used to currency conversions, that shouldn't be too difficult. So here you can see the evolution of our work, if you like, of the interpreter day or the ISLOT for the last 3 years. You'll see a downward curve. I have to explain there that 2008 was a bit of a record year from many points of view. We had the French presidency, which was active. I think journalists use the term hyperactive. We wouldn't do that, but let's say we were extremely busy. So you can see that 2008 was actually a very difficult actor to follow, if I can use the same terminology again. And 2009 and 2010 have been down. There are reasons for that, I think. 2009, well, 2008 was such a record year that 2009 had to be a bit lower. And 2010 was the entry into force of Lisbon, and another natural phenomenon, which unfortunately seemed to be occurring more and more frequently, which I'll come to at a later stage. But you can see that, broadly speaking, you still have the big 5 languages. It's a bit like safaris in Kenya. There's the big 5. You can see them at the beginning. They're maintaining their position. In the, I don't know if you can still talk about newcomers, or latecomers is slightly pejorative, but amongst the 2004 enlargement languages, you can see that Polish is making a bit of a sprint and consolidating its position. If we were a stockbroker, we would say that they've consolidated, ready for the next acceleration. Polish is a language to which the Poles attach very great importance. They're very keen supporters of multilingualism. And I expect to see that column growing in the future. That's it in a more graphic form, 2009-2010 comparison. Again, you can see that some languages have gone down a little bit. There it's percentages of demand. So, I mean, it is slightly misleading. I mean, the statistics always give you a slightly biased view of things, despite their intention. And there you can see that, for example, Maltese has gone down 4%. In fact, that was very, very little in terms of the overall effort, which, because of the shortage of Maltese interpreters, was not the biggest of the languages either. The far right column, the grey column, is others. Others, that is, apart from the official EU languages. And perhaps we can move on to that. I'm not expert enough to go through all that, and we don't have the time to do it anyway, but you can see that the first column, the tallest column, is Russian, and Russian has grown a lot. We have a lot of demand for Russian, and it's by far the biggest of the non-official languages for which we are asked to provide interpretation. But there are others, and there are in fact more than would fit onto this slide with any degree of visibility for them. This is a monthly look at activity. You can see that for some reason humans are still extremely seasonal. I mean, there's no rational, in a rational world, we would have a more or less equal distribution of this activity over the year. It doesn't work like that. There are holidays, times when people are perhaps not hibernating, but not quite so active as they are later. And you can see a pickup in spring, and then getting ready for the winter as well after the summer holidays, which is the peak of the year, incidentally, the last, well, 3 of the last 4 months of the year. This is a rather idiosyncratic way of judging our activity. This is by week, first of all, and the color coding is very unusual. It refers to the temperature in the office of the planning and programming unit. Green is fine. You can see when the levels are normal, they're coping without any problems. They're really in overdrive, no problems at all. The orange, well, things are getting a bit tougher. And the red, once it goes above the 5,000 eye slots, then things are really beginning to hot up, and there everything is being used up. And then you'll see one black. That is not what you think. That is not meltdown or anything like that. That, well, not of the programming unit. That was the Icelandic ash cloud. And you can see the effect it had there. So that then is our view in a few figures, in a nutshell, of the year 2010 in terms of our activity. On the other hand, the presentation is also termed Trends in Interpreting, and there are trends other than the actual demand levels, and certainly for you, we are not living so much in the present as looking far forward into the future. So I thought it would be a good idea just to have a look around, and this is not intended to be a complete panorama, but just a few of the key things that I think may be influencing us and which you may be interested in picking up and contributing to as well in our discussion afterwards, or adding to in the discussion afterwards, because these go well beyond la relève in the real work, but also into the possible evolution of the profession, conferences or language professions in general. These are all things that are very nebulous and that we will have to think about, even if, you know, as the famous saying goes, we don't make predictions, especially about the future. So, I mentioned to you that this is the overheating of the programming and planning. And the overheating of programming and planning is not simply due to things like European councils, where we're asked for one part of the European Council to provide 4x4 languages, which is then immediately countermanded and turned into a 22 to 22. And when we have done the 22 into 22, which means upsetting various other teams as well, then we get the message, actually, it's okay, forget about the 22-22, we'll stick to the 4-4. I don't know how that's reflected in there. If there were a few white bits where white heat has been achieved, you might see it. But there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and the interpreters in the booth are the visible end of this, and of course the sharp end of this. But I do wish also to pay tribute to the people in the back rooms and the conference organizers as well, who contribute a lot as well. So why is it overheating? Well, first of all, for the reasons I mentioned, but also there's another reason. And we've dealt with this before, but now we're seeing the first manifestations of it. We have said to you before that the baby boomers are retiring and that young people are coming in. Not enough. We're working on that. We have been working on that together with you for quite some time, and I do not expect that to finish in the very near future either, incidentally. But we'll come back to that too. One of the problems is that the people who are going away and taking 5, 6, 7 languages with them. And the people who are coming in are bringing 2, at most 3 languages with them. This is an example of a team sheet for a meeting that we serviced some time ago now. It's not, but it's still applicable. We don't just do from all languages or from a fixed number of languages into a fixed number of languages. We offer a really tailor-made solution to meeting organizers. We say to them, what do you want? And we'll do our best to give it to you. So a lot of people, a lot of delegates here can follow the discussions, you know this, in another language, generally English, but also French, German, Spanish, Italian, whatever. And sometimes very strange combinations do spring up, which is always nice. But they like, and I think they're right, we heard José Turri, even without hearing José Turri yesterday, they knew instinctively that they did a better job of getting their message across in most cases. And I'm not talking about professional linguists here, present company accepted. But most delegates to meetings do a better job if they speak in their own language. I think this was the point that José Turri was making. We're not a language police. We don't have, the head of the interpreting team doesn't have a taser gun in his pocket, and anybody who doesn't speak their mother tongue is immediately stunned and carried out. It doesn't work like that. They can speak what they want. Some people are very good. Some people, we have domain specialization too. I was born bilingual. I wouldn't say I was bilingual now, but in professional terms, my Italian's not good enough to talk in a professional environment because I don't have the terminology, I don't have the familiarization. We had some very famous expert in a given agricultural domain some years ago who was Italian, who always spoke French, who was incapable of speaking Italian professionally because he had been dealing with this terminology in French for the last 25 years. He was the world expert in this bit of the agricultural policy, and he couldn't do it in Italian. He did it in French. The interpreters complained because the French wasn't always French. It was sometimes a bit imaginative. At the same time, he did try, at our request, he did try to speak Italian. And I have to say, he showed tremendous will, but he looked at us very plaintively and sort of said, look, this is not on. And he stopped, and he went back to French. And we have to accept that. We can't be Talibans of the language either. On the other hand, the majority of people who are not language specialists would do better to speak their own language, and most of them realize this. And this is why we have this sort of meeting. So they can listen in one of the 5 languages. You can see there that the 5 which have turned up are no surprises. And they can speak any one of 22 languages. Basically, any one of the official languages except Irish, which is only used in limited circumstances, but which is an official language. Let me add quickly, for the sake of Susan Foley. Susan, you'll still speak to me? Okay. So that's how we've been doing it. Now, what happens if you look, I don't know if you can see very well, you don't really need to see very well, but you have a photograph of each interpreter, then you have the name, and underneath you have the language combinations. And some of the things under the names, which you won't be able to read, you can see are pretty short. Others are fairly long and, in fact, spill over onto 2 lines. Now, the people with the long and 2-line combinations are leaving, which means that the asymmetric regimes that we are setting up are causing the programming people more and more problems. I don't want to go into the technicalities of it. I'll spare you my expertise. It's quickly said anyway. But basically, when they start on teams like this, they choose people with a large combination, a wide-ranging combination, and then add people on to cover the gaps. Now, those basic building blocks are heading for retirement. So La Relève is not just important, not just for the future, it's actually a problem already now. But we knew this was coming. So SCIC has reinforced. We already had a very massive investment in training. We have a very convincing head of unit for training. Claude, take a bow. And also the service has traditionally invested in training very heavily. And so this year, in fact, we took advantage of the slight turn down in work, and we increased the possibilities for training, with the result that we went up 6%, and we already, as I say, started from a very high level. What does this mean in practical terms? Forget the general, the thematic, the meeting content type of training. We're looking here, because this is the point I raised, at language combinations. You can see the rise. 2008, total number of languages added 54, 2009, 67, 2010, 92. Now, this didn't just happen in the year. The figure is attributed to a year, but the effort has been going on for at least 4 years before that. So this is just to say we're not simply preaching, we're also practicing what we do, and we are taking every measure to make sure that we do what we can to soften the blow or the potential blow, and in fact to eliminate the possibility of real problems occurring with La Relève. Other things we do, you know most of these, but I'll just give you a quick summary. We awarded 13 grants. We did this together with our friends from the Parliament, who, as you know, sit on the same, we have an interinstitutional grant committee, and we awarded 13 grants to universities. SCIC awarded 150 bursaries to postgraduate student interpreters. We had 61 groups on study visits. That's a total of 706 participants. 4 training for trainer seminars for new member states and candidate countries, and a top-up training session for Russian mother tongue interpreters. We also introduced and piloted in 2010 some extra novelty things. You can see here the system as you knew it before last year. We do awareness raising, we do students and universities, bursaries, grants, pedagogical assistance, and then you become an EU interpreter, a bit like Aphrodite coming out of the sea, by going into a test and emerging with a shining halo afterwards. If you do, that's fine. You go straight into the pool of the EU accredited interpreters, which is a common pool amongst the 3 EU institutions with interpreting services, as you know. And if you didn't, up till now, well, you went round, you went back to your desk, studied a bit, practiced your languages, practiced your techniques, and then came back for another go. Now, we introduced in 2010, and they were invented in 2009, which was the year of innovation and creativity, just by chance. In 2010, we piloted 3 new programs. The first one was the integration program. So, you went to your EU test. Yes, same progress onto the IEC box. No, depends. Clear no, then you do the test again. No, but pretty close. And the jury said, well, you know, we gave a negative verdict, but this candidate was actually good enough to convince us that the potential was there, but on this particular day, and we all know what exam systems are like, on this particular day, can't do it. We couldn't say yes. But we do think there's something there, and we do think the person should continue. So what do? We invented this integration program, which is a way of, we hope, taking the sting out of the test. It's a big jump from university to the booth. And this is not a reproach to the universities in any way. You do your very best, but it's the same for any training at all. And I think to expect somebody to emerge from a university course and just be dropped straight into a hot seat is stretching the imagination. Just by chance, I happened to sit next to a young black guy in a plane, and he had been a hydraulic engineer. He'd qualified. He'd gone to Lyon to work for a certain unnamed French company, but I'm sure you can imagine which was a specialist in water. He'd done a year training course there as a trainee in-house, and he was now being sent to a developing country for 3 months to see how it happened on the ground. He would then be given his first assignment. So we're really not mollycoddling or being excessively protective or whatever. We just simply have to accept that it's a big jump from the university to the professional world. We try and make it as short a jump as possible, but it's still there. And the integration program is aimed at doing that, familiarizing them with the environment of the EU, of the working interpreting booth, and maybe they will be less intimidated, our hope is, because they'll have seen what it's all about. When they go into the test, they will be less worried, less concerned, more at ease, and more able to show what they can do. It doesn't mean we're easier with them when they go in for the test either. The standards are still there, but maybe they're a bit less intimidated than they were before. So, for the integration program, we had 2 sessions in 2010, and we had a grand total of 11 interpreters, 11 new interpreters from 10 different languages, which is pretty good. The top-up course that we did before, it's a different instrument. I'm not making comparisons, but the top-up course has certain advantages. The integration program has other advantages. The integration program is more, I believe, tuned to the requirements of La Relève, because we can take on a wide range of languages. With the top-up course, we had to specialize in 2-3 languages maximum, which meant that some languages were waiting a very long time. We also had to have a critical mass. Here we don't. With the integration program, we can just pick and mix from the reservoir of people with talent and run a regular program. So that's been, I think, a very successful innovation, and a lot of hard work went into it by my former directorate, and I'd just like to say thank you to them and recognize the effort they've been doing, and also for my current directorate, who had to extract people from meetings in order to take care of that requirement. Then we have the next one, which is the key trainers. Oh, I've got two at the same time. Let's take the key trainers, because there's more trainers than newcomers here. The key trainers scheme meant that interpreters who were EU accredited interpreters and who worked in training schemes in the universities, well, how can I put it mildly? They weren't used to surviving on the wages of a part-time university professor. And when they moved away from Brussels to go to the training courses, they found a substantial drop in income, perhaps a substantial rise in satisfaction as well, I'm sure, because people don't go into training for the money. I don't think I've ever met anybody who's gone into educational training for money. No. Okay. So the key trainers then were finding themselves in a little bit of a pickle. And in fact, in a workshop, I was talking to somebody, and they very innocently said that they were probably going to have to leave the university and come back to Brussels because there wasn't enough work if they stayed where they were. So I immediately said to them, hang on, don't do anything rash, stay there, it's an interesting idea. And I came back and I talked about it with Marco and with other people, and we set something up which allowed, I think, a real win-win situation. In other words, we have long-term recruitment, which is normally limited to people who are domiciled in Brussels. And normally speaking, it's a block of 4 days that they have to offer, to make things simpler for the programming unit, obviously. But in this particular case, we decided to make an exception for these key trainers, and they have to be people who are pillars of the training courses, not simply people who pop in every 3 months to make a speech. And they have to be also accredited with us, of course, and we allow them a special window to climb in the long-term recruitment. And we also make that window a bit tailor-made, because they only have to give 3 days a week, which allows them 2 days back home to do their courses. So we see the win-win situation for the trainers. We see the win-win situation for us, because they work for us in Brussels, and they constantly feed back the professional standards, the professional feedback a practicing interpreter can give, whereas somebody who was exclusively a trainer would not necessarily be able to give in the same way. So this is why I say it's a win-win situation, and I think it's gone extremely well. We had this year 30 participants from 22 different universities. So let's not forget that 30 participants is a multiplier effect, which can be multiplied by the number of students involved as well. And then lastly, we had the newcomers scheme. I was talking before about the gap between university and the world of work. And what we did was introduce something which basically breaks a vicious circle. If you don't have any work, you don't have any experience. If you don't have any experience, you don't get any work. So what we said was, okay, you pass our test and we will guarantee you up to 80 days a year. We have to limit it for obvious reasons, limit the number of beneficiaries, but this has been extremely helpful and extremely appreciated, and we've had 39 young interpreters from 13 different language units benefit from that scheme too. And it's a rolling scheme, so there's no particular cut-off point either. So these three were trialled in 2010, and then at the end of the year we had a big evaluation, and senior management met, and Marco agreed, or decided rather, that this should be a structural component of the program from now on. So these three will now be permanent features of our program. Pedagogical assistance, very quickly, you know about this. 54 universities benefited, a total of nearly 600 days, approximately 3 man-years, just to put that into perspective. 63% training, the rest in exams and training for trainers to a much smaller extent. And the favorite modules, the top 6 were advanced consecutive, advanced simultaneous, introduction to note-taking, introduction to simultaneous, Rito and relay training, and then themed masterclass. And this really actually confirms our approach, which was that we reinforce at critical points the work that the in-house trainers are doing. I mean, introduction to note-taking, for example, this is a particularly and well-known point in the training where you have to be very hands-on, and that the higher the ratio of instructors to pupils, the better it goes. The more personal the attention that can be given, the better it is. And in fact, the demand tends to confirm our philosophy, which is not a surprise, but it's always very nice, of course. This is an example of a stunning success. I don't know how many of you have seen a boat with EF on. In 1990, I'm a sailor, or I try to do it every now and again, n'est-ce pas, Vale? And I was stunned to see a boat participating in a race with EF on it. And I thought, EF? Normally it's world-famous companies. EF. So I looked up EF. EF is a language learning company. Education First. Founded by a guy, a Swede, Bertil Hult, if I remember his name right, who was dyslexic, who had learning difficulties. And he decided that really he wanted to know English, but he wasn't making any progress. And he decided that he wanted to go, the only way he would do it was to go to, he wanted to learn English, to go to England. And being a clever guy, he said, well, I'm not going to go on my own. I'll take lots of other people too, and they'll pay. I don't know if they paid for him or not. The story doesn't tell that. But he went to England with a group of people, and this was the start of Education First. Now, being Swedish, he reinvested everything back into the company, went very high-tech, and worked with Apple, for example, made their own customized, I think they're the only ones who have their own series of customized textbooks. And has anybody heard of Berlitz recently? They've overtaken them, and by a long chalk. Berlitz was taken over by a Japanese company, and to quote Mr. Bertil Hult, they did a really bad job, and we're absolutely thrilled. So, languages work, we know that, but here you have a classic example of somebody coming in with an innovative approach and a total commitment, and it is, I'm happy to say, a success story for him. They hope, I'm not sure if they'll do it, but their aim is to get 70% of the language learning market. And they offer 24-hour access, offices in 50 countries, special programs, blah, 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 etc., etc. I have no shares, again, full disclosure. Simply, I thought it was very heartening for you to know that there are success stories in language, because the common story we hear is that, well, it's all a dead end. It's not. It's not. Here again, the top 10 languages in the internet: English, Chinese, Spanish, Japanese, Portuguese, German, Arabic, French, Russian, Korean, and then the rest. Okay, the ranking may not surprise you, but a few years ago, not long ago, the Commission was encouraged, in inverted commas, by some member states to set up a multilingual internet program, because English was steamrolling all the other languages out of existence. In fact, English now is down to just less, I believe, than 50% of internet content. These are millions of users. So, contrary to what people expected, contrary to conventional wisdom, the internet has actually served to foster, to nurture, and to bring out lots of other languages. And these are the big ones, of course, but in the others, there's some very interesting ones. From the 1st of January 2007, we were empowered by the Council of Ministers, who has sole authority on languages in the European Union, sole authority, and any change has to be unanimous. We were empowered to offer Catalan, Galician, and Basque under certain circumstances with prior request, etc., in the Council. The UK government quickly followed suit with Welsh and Scots Gaelic. Now, here we have examples of languages. Some of them, Welsh 20 years ago was disappearing. It's now an extremely vibrant language community with its own television channel, etc. The same goes for Irish. The same goes for Scots Gaelic, which when I last looked was 3 or 4 scattered communities with no language codification, i.e. no one single language. It's all changing. So, globalization, interpreting in a globalized world, may mean more English as a lingua franca, or interlingua, or whatever you want to call it, but it does not mean convergence, except insofar as you accept that convergence and divergence can cohabit together. And this is the trend for the future. We have, between candidates and pre-candidate countries, we have 9 countries, 9 languages coming up for us. So here again, I don't know what the official number of languages will be. That's not our decision, thank goodness. But you can bet that it's not going down. And then finally, lastly, I was always taught there were 5 continents. Apparently things have changed. We have America, Europe, Africa, Asia. We've been active there up till now. As Marco said in his opening address, we have an Australian representative here. He's actually from Bordeaux, but I mean, you understand what I mean. And we're very happy to extend our cooperation and our friendship to the 5th continent. I say the 5th, but you've noticed, in fact, there is a 6th one down there, Antarctica. However, let me reassure you, there are no native inhabitants in Antarctica, only researchers, and not the sort of research that interests us. So thank you very much, and I hope that at least you will go away with some things to think about and to contribute as well. Oh, one last thing I wanted to say, technology. We see various things. The translators have done a really good job in adopting or adapting technology. And they use technology, they're far more advanced than interpreters are. I suppose to some extent that's natural, and I'm not saying that we should be there where they are, but I'm always impressed by the work that's done by the translators. Jamcat, for example, all this computer-assisted translation, which helps the translator. And I think very few would go back to typewriters or dictation machines nowadays. On the other hand, I think that we need to do a bit more as interpreters as well. And this digital pen, et cetera, that we talked about, I originally called it the magic pen, I think is maybe something for us to think about, very seriously. I mean, I could see, with a little bit of futurology, that we might be able to provide, for example, glossaries to a targeted group of interpreters who are going to a specific meeting on fish names, which was the example chosen, and which are the particular bane of interpreters, or whatever. I was once thrown into a meeting at the last minute on high-temperature fusion welding. I've never forgotten it. It keeps me very humble. I bet the delegates never forgot it either. Thank you.